Now, here in the UK, King Charles has thanked everyone who sent him messages of support since his cancer diagnosis.
12 cities disrupted. 9 riot incidents in just 7 days. More than 3,400 officers deployed, stretched, and in some regions, completely overwhelmed. £41 million in public order costs in 1 month. That is the Britain King Charles looked out upon this week, and only then decided to say something. After weeks of unrest, anti-racism marches turning into street confrontations, anti-immigration groups marching into counter-marches, neighborhoods on edge, police forces publicly warning they are operating at structural breaking point, the king finally stepped forward with a royal message calling for unity, mutual respect, and shared values. Lovely words, beautiful sentiment, utterly, spectacularly useless. Because let's stop pretending this is 1977 or even 2012. This is not the era of Elizabeth II, a monarch whose voice, whether you liked the monarchy or not, could actually steady the nation. This is modern Britain. And modern Britain doesn't turn to the crown for strength anymore. It turns to power. And the power sits with Keir Starmer, whether the public trusts him or not. And while Charles stands by a microphone talking softly about community spirit, Starmer's government is busy drafting emergency directives, restricting demonstrations, deploying specialist units, and quietly preparing for more unrest they absolutely know is coming. No wonder the country reacted to Charles's speech not with comfort, but with a collective, exhausted eye roll. Nice message, Your Majesty. It won't stop tomorrow's riot. Where was this unity talk a month ago? Bring back Elizabeth. At least she felt like stability. Because that's the real mood across Britain right now. People don't feel reassured. They feel unprotected. And absolutely everyone knows the man wearing the crown is not the man running the country. Which leaves Britain with one haunting question, whispered in pubs, in living rooms, and across social media the moment Charles finished speaking. If the king can't calm the nation, and Starmer won't,
the second is
then who will?
Criminal justice.
And if you want reporting that doesn't pretend everything is fine, take 1 second to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps.
Britain entered this week already stretched thin, neighborhoods unsettled, police forces running on fumes, and another round of unrest simmering just beneath the surface. It has been one of the most volatile months since the early 2000s, the kind where people wake up already bracing for whatever goes wrong next. And yet, in the middle of this pressure, King Charles chose this moment to step forward and offer a soft, royal plea for unity and shared values, as if the country had simply forgotten to hold hands. But the reaction across Britain was immediate. This speech was too late, too vague, and utterly disconnected from the nation he was trying to calm. People weren't waiting for a monarch's reassurance. They were waiting for a government that could actually stop the slide. Because while Charles spoke gently about community spirit, the ground reality looked nothing like the picture he painted. Streets in several cities had already seen pockets of unrest throughout the week. Not full riots, but enough clashes, arrests, and standoffs that police commanders privately admitted they were one incident away from escalation. Officers described a slow burn of tension, the kind that doesn't break in a headline, but gathers force day by day. Shops in multiple regions quietly closed early, not out of panic, but because managers didn't want to gamble. Parents told teenagers to come home before sunset. Councils sent late-night emails reminding residents to avoid certain areas, phrased politely but carrying an unmistakable sense of worry. And into this atmosphere walked a royal message that felt like it was written in another century. Charles praised the spirit of unity that had supposedly guided Britain through the past week. People watching at home couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Unity? Where? On which street? In which neighborhood? In which part of this country that has spent the last month arguing, protesting, clashing, and questioning its institutions? It wasn't malice. It wasn't indifference. It was simply a speech from a man who no longer sits inside the center of Britain's political storm. Because modern Britain has changed. The monarchy has not. And the deeper truth, the one every viewer felt but none of the broadcasters dared to say outright, is this. Charles can call for unity as much as he wants, It won't make a dent in the reality Keir Starmer now presides over. For better or worse, the power no longer sits at the palace. It sits in Downing Street, with a prime minister whose grip on the moment feels as fragile as the calm he keeps promising. Communities didn't dismiss Charles because they disliked him. They dismissed him because his words can't move the machinery that actually governs policing, protests, immigration pressure, or social disorder. People politely listened, and then returned to wondering why Starmer was nowhere to be seen during the most strained week of his leadership. Britain isn't rejecting the monarchy. It's rejecting the illusion that the monarchy can save it. And as the country waits for Starmer's next move, or misstep, Charles's speech becomes not a moment of national unity, but a stark reminder of something far more uncomfortable. Britain today doesn't need a symbolic voice. It needs a functioning one. If Charles's speech exposed how detached the monarchy is from the country's mood, the aftermath exposed something worse: how far the British state itself has drifted from the lived reality of the people it governs. Because while the king spoke of mutual respect, the streets this week told a different story. One of exhausted communities, overstretched institutions, and a government frantically trying to manage optics rather than outcomes. Across several cities, residents described the same unsettling pattern. Moments of calm punctured by sudden surges of disorder, police units arriving late or not at all, and neighborhood tensions bubbling with a volatility that no royal address could paper over. In the Midlands, one local official admitted that no one trusts the daily reassurances anymore. Everyone thinks we're one misstep away from another eruption. In parts of Greater Manchester, community leaders said they were relieved the weekend didn't spiral, not because tensions were lower, but because nothing happened at the wrong time in the wrong place. This is the Britain Charles didn't address, not because he didn't want to, but because he can't. The monarchy is a spectator now, watching a political arena that has outgrown ceremonial comfort. And at the center of that arena is Keir Starmer, whose response to the past month's unrest has left millions asking a question that gets more uncomfortable by the day: does he actually have a strategy? Or is he just hoping the storm passes? Inside the Home Office, senior staff privately admitted this week that policing resources are running on a knife's edge. Multiple forces confirmed they had already burned through emergency funding allocations meant to last until the spring. Commanders spoke of morale shock, resilience fatigue, and a constant pressure cycle driven by protest waves, immigration tensions, and rising distrust between communities. None of this appeared in Charles's carefully scripted remarks. None of it was even hinted at. Instead, the public was told, once again, to stand together. But standing together becomes difficult when the institutions tasked with keeping order can barely stand themselves. A senior policing advisor put it bluntly, "When you have a king speaking like everything is symbolic and a prime minister acting like everything is manageable, the public knows someone's lying. They just can't decide who." And that's the real crisis unfolding beneath the headlines. A catastrophic collapse of confidence, not in the nation's values, but in the nation's ability to enforce them. Communities no longer believe London understands what they're living through. London no longer believes communities understand the strain institutions are under. And in the middle sits a monarch offering comforting sentiments no one asked for, and a prime minister offering political steadiness no one can feel. Even Starmer's closest allies admit privately that the public mood is slipping out of reach. Not turning against him, not rising up, just slipping. An erosion that is slower, quieter, but far more dangerous for a leader who built his promise on the idea of restoring stability. Because nothing this month feels stable. Not the streets, not the councils, not the police, not the Home Office, and certainly not the public's patience. Charles's speech tried to create the illusion of calm. Starmer's silence allowed the reality of chaos to deepen. And between the two, Britain found itself in a vacuum. A country waiting for leadership that never seems to arrive from either the palace or Downing Street. The monarchy cannot steady the moment, the government cannot contain it, and the public cannot ignore it. That is the Britain of today, a nation holding its breath, not because the king asked for unity, but because no one in power seems capable of delivering it. What became unmistakably clear this week, clearer than any royal speech, clearer than any Downing Street briefing, is that Britain's crisis is not just happening on the streets. It's happening in the institutions meant to guide the country through moments like these. Because if the riots exposed cracks in policing, the King's response exposed cracks in something even deeper, the national story Britain tells itself. For decades, through recessions, terror scares, wars, and political upheavals, the monarchy served as a kind of emotional stabilizer, a symbolic weight that helped keep the national balance steady. Elizabeth II could address a shaken nation, and even if nothing truly changed, people felt anchored. But this week, watching Charles deliver polished lines about mutual respect, the country didn't feel anchored. It felt unconvinced, as if the words were coming from a man reading a national mood board rather than a national emergency. And that is the flaw now laid bare. Britain no longer believes its symbolic stabilizers can stabilize anything. The monarchy cannot do it. The Prime Minister will not do it. And so the responsibility has slid, silently, reluctantly, onto institutions that are hardly equipped for the burden. Police forces strained to breaking point, councils overwhelmed, local authorities begging for clarity they never receive, communities forced into the role of first responders whenever tensions flare faster than the state can react. And all of this played out while Charles spoke about unity, and Starmer disappeared into the polished corridors of Number 10, issuing careful statements designed to sound firm but say very little. One senior officer, speaking bluntly under anonymity, put it like this: "People want order, but they can see the Crown can't provide it, and the government can barely pretend to." It's not just a policing issue. It's not just a political issue. It's a credibility issue. Because while the palace performs calm and the government performs competence, the public performs something else entirely: endurance. The truth is brutally simple. Britons are enduring more than their leaders are acknowledging. Enduring stretched public services, enduring neighborhood tensions heightened by misinformation and migration disputes, enduring institutions that feel increasingly distant from daily life. And in the middle of that endurance sits a prime minister whose authority feels strangely fragile, not collapsing, not crumbling, but thinning, becoming harder to feel, harder to trust, harder to believe in. When community organizers in Birmingham were asked whether Charles's speech changed anything, one replied, "It sounded nice, but the situation isn't nice. We don't need poetry, we need decisions." When London volunteers were asked if they felt reassured by Starmer's latest statements, one said, "He says things are under control. We live here, we know they're not." When a teacher in Leeds was asked whether the unrest surprised her, she said, "We've been warning them for months. They don't hear us until something explodes." These are not outliers. These are the voices filling the political vacuum. Voices that never appear in royal addresses or Number 10 press releases, but which now shape the national psyche more powerfully than either. This is what neither the palace nor the government seems willing to confront. Britain is not struggling because people are divided. Britain is struggling because people feel they're being left to hold the country together on their own. And when leadership feels absent, symbolically and politically, the public notices. Charles's message attempted to soothe. Starmer's tactics attempt to manage, but neither approach addresses the uncomfortable truth behind this month's unrest. The institutions that once defined Britain no longer define its stability. Not when communities feel unprotected, not when policing feels reactive rather than preventative, not when Downing Street feels like it's managing a spreadsheet rather than a country, not when the monarchy's reassurances feel like echoes from a different era. Whether the government admits it or not, whether Charles acknowledges it or not, the question now hanging over the nation is no longer about unity, it is about credibility. Who still has it? Who has lost it? And who, if anyone, can regain it? Because this week made one thing painfully clear. If the Crown cannot calm the nation, and the government cannot control it, then Britain is entering a chapter where stability is not inherited, it has to be earned. So as the dust settles, at least for now, Britain is left with a king offering comfort, a prime minister offering control, and a public that believes neither, because unity cannot be declared from a palace balcony, and stability cannot be managed from behind a lectern. People want clarity, they want accountability, they want someone, anyone, who looks like they understand the scale of what this country is living through. Tonight's question is simple. Who do you trust to steady Britain The crown? The government? Or no one at all? Comment below, because your answer says more about the state of this nation than any royal speech ever will.